Hi, it's Matt Karamazov. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, it's good to have you. Hope you'll stick around. So these are 4 must-read books that I think should be on teachers' bookshelves everywhere. If you're thinking about becoming a teacher or you're a teacher already, you should definitely check these 4 books out. Because when I think back on like the best teachers that I've ever had, I can't be certain whether or not they've read these 4 books, but they may as well have, because the best of what they've transmitted to me, what they've passed on to me, is what's found in these 4 books. I mean, when I think back on it, I came into this world like completely unprepared for life and really for survival. But here I am 30 years later, and everything that I am, everything that I've achieved and become, every possibility that's open for me in my future is because there was a teacher somewhere there who cared enough. Of course, if you care enough as a teacher, it almost doesn't matter what you teach because your students are going to pick up on that and they're going to be changed by that. But these 4 books will definitely help. So, I mean, teachers are literally heroes. And if you want to become like an even more genuine hero in the lives of your students, definitely check out these 4 books, and we're starting right now. Okay, so the first book on this list is called On Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers. Now, technically, this is a book about psychotherapy, but the best teachers are part therapists in a sense. So the therapist's job is to model the behaviors and patterns of a mature adult, and the best ones, like Carl Rogers, are able to make their patients feel seen. In a classroom of 30+ kids, how many of them feel as though their teachers truly see them? And another powerful concept that Carl Rogers introduced me to was the idea of unconditional positive regard. Essentially, this is a stance that the therapist takes towards his patients and that the best teachers take towards their students, which communicates that the patient or the student is worthy of respect, dignity, admiration, and even awe, and that they are fundamentally worthy of life and love. This isn't based on what they do or on where they come from, what they look like, or anything that they may have done in the past. This is unconditional, granted from one human being to another. Rogers' profound idea was that once the patient feels accepted, heard, and seen, then they are capable of change. Forcing your students to adopt certain behaviors or mindsets isn't going to work. You have to model those things for yourself and show them that that maturity is possible for your students as well. And the best teachers accept their students completely and totally, even though they recognize that in some areas they have to change. And Carl Rogers says, "As I am more willing to be myself, I find that I'm more ready to permit you to be yourself with all that that implies." And Carl Rogers' idea of unconditional positive regard, accepting the student totally even though they have to change in some ways, reminds me of a famous Zen master. I don't remember the guy's name, but it's something he said to his students. And he said that each of you are absolutely perfect the way you are, and you could each use a little bit of improvement. So it's those 2 contradictory ideas that are both true at once. That total radical acceptance of your student the way he is, but really, willing to be there and help them change as well into a mature, responsible adult. That you model those behaviors, that pattern of behavior for them. And that brings me to the next book on this list, which I absolutely loved the first time that I read it. It's called Shakespeare Saved My Life by Laura Bates. If Laura Bates can teach Shakespeare to death row inmates, then you can definitely handle your 3rd grade English class. I'm sure of it. Dr. Bates started her own Shakespeare study program for prisoners in Indiana's Supermax prison, and this is her memoir, Shakespeare Saved My Life. It's powerful because it shows that even the toughest crowd can develop a genuine love of learning, and that teachers themselves need occasionally to be tough. Sometimes you're going to have to win over a hostile classroom. But she would tell you that you should never give up on any one of your students, and never to write someone off just because you think that they're not going to care or that they'll never become a good student. Readers emerge from the unlikeliest of places. Just a small warning though, this is one of the saddest books that I have ever read, especially the part where Dr. Bates is describing how at the trial of one of her future students, Larry Newton, sat in the defendant's chair with his fingers in his ears, trying not to hear his lawyer talk about his history of parental neglect. And as the convicted criminal Larry Newton says about life, it just goes by so fast. Everyone overlooks enjoying it. They just put themselves into so many prisons. And the 3rd book on the list of must-read books for teachers is one of my favorite books of all time. It's Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And depending on the grade level that you teach, you might end up teaching this one in class. I mean, lots of high school students and junior high students end up reading it, which would be fantastic. It is such a spectacular book. I cannot say enough good things about it. I've read it again and again And again, Fahrenheit is a dystopian novel about firemen in the future who they don't fight fires, they burn books. And I mention it here to show you, or show your students, what can happen when reading is endangered. And it also shows in vivid detail the process of awakening of the main character, Guy Montag, when he wakes up to the power of books and literature to change and transform destinies. And it's also got this mechanical hound that hunts people down who are caught hoarding books and delivers this like lethal injection via its tail. Anyway, it's wild. And actually, come to think of it, this book's pretty sad too, because it's got this woman who ends up being burned alive because she refuses to part with her books. Like, she's discovered to be hoarding all these books in her house, and she refuses to leave her house, and she ends up getting burned alive. It's one of the saddest parts of the whole book. And I mean, if you can, like, anybody who loves to read that much, like as much as I do and as much as Bradbury did, you know, we totally understand what was going through that woman's mind. And if you can inspire that sort of dedication and love of literature and learning in your students, that they would not leave a burning building if it meant giving up their books, then they're going to be pretty unstoppable in life, and thanks to you. And a quote here from Fahrenheit 451, and remember, all of my notes are available on my Patreon, but here Bradbury says, "Stuff your eyes with wonder," he said. "Live as if you drop dead in 10 seconds. See the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in factories." So that's a pretty spectacular book, and so is this next one. It's called The Revolution from Within by Jiddu Krishnamurti, and it's one, I mean, speaking of book notes, you know, this is one I have more than 10 pages of notes on this book, and I think you'll see why. This last book is here because the ability to question authority and to think for themselves is one of the greatest gifts you'll be able to give to your students. You can only take them so far. They have to make that last leap by themselves. And it is a leap, because one of the things that Krishnamurti teaches, and this book is a collection of his public talks throughout the 1950s, is that change is not the result of time. It is instantaneous. If you want your students to be kind, generous, nonviolent, and happy, that transformation must take place now. There is no later. If you say that you want to become nonviolent, then you've just defined yourself as a person who is violent and is trying to give up violence. But the entire time that process is taking place, you're still giving yourself permission to be violent. In much the same way, an unhappy person who's trying to become happier is still, by definition, an unhappy person, and thus will never achieve happiness. They just never get there. Krishnamurti voluntarily renounced a position of influence and power in order to force people to think for themselves instead of blindly following him. As a teacher, you're definitely in a position of influence, but your greatest moment will be when your students achieve independence and are ready to move out on their own. And this here is one of my favorite quotes from the book. This is directly from my notes, and Krishnamurti says, "Trying to change society while leaving the individuals who constitute society unchanged is a dangerous error." So that just about wraps up my list of 4 must-read books for teachers everywhere. But I think you'll agree that, you know, the most important thing that you pass on to them isn't going to be from some book. It's not something that you can test for. It's not going to be something that shows up on an exam. You know, they might forget all of the mathematical theorems and the historical dates and whatever else you tried to teach them. But you know, they're not going to forget your acceptance of them, your intellectual courage, your warmth, basically the excitement that you brought to the classroom, all those intangibles that, again, they just don't show up on any exam or any sort of test anywhere, but they are what separates, you know, good, you know, average, mediocre teachers from the ones who are remembered, the ones who change lives, you know, the genuine heroes, which you have a, you know, the possibility of becoming. You know, as a teacher, you always have a chance to change someone else's life irrevocably. But I said I'd wrap this up, so I'll just say that for every new subscriber to the channel, what I do is I donate $1 to the children's charity First Book, and what they do is they supply books to kids who otherwise wouldn't have access to them or wouldn't be able to afford them. So obviously that's pretty important, especially in light of what we're talking about in this video. And I also have my fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders down in the description. You'll see all of that stuff, and as well, I'm giving away hundreds of dollars worth of free bookish related stuff, including free books. So every month, what I do is I pick one of my subscribers at random, and I buy them a book of their choice. So the details are all down below, and I'll leave you with the words of Frederick Douglass. He was an escaped slave who taught himself how to read, so he did not have the advantage of, you know, great teachers in his life. He had to do that himself, but he taught himself how to read so well that he became one of the greatest writers ever. And what he said is that once you learn to read, you will be forever free. I couldn't agree more, so go read a book, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers.
I don't waste time, no, I make time. All these people wanna hate, fine, I'ma make mine. While you sitting there complaining, I'll be training. While you sitting there just waiting, I'm creating. Yeah, sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable. Yeah, ready to go, man, lock and load.